Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to explore a powerful idea that most people misunderstand. Hard times build monsters. Not monsters driven by anger or destruction, but individuals forged through adversity, people who develop extraordinary resilience, discipline, emotional control, and mental strength because life demanded it from them. We'll examine what happens inside the brain and nervous system during difficult periods, why adversity can become a catalyst for growth, how purpose transforms suffering into strength, and why the strongest people are often shaped by the hardest experiences. If you're facing challenges right now, this conversation may completely change the way you view them. Let's begin. One of the most important things to understand about adversity is that difficult experiences have a unique ability to reveal aspects of ourselves that remain hidden during periods of comfort. When life is predictable, when circumstances are favorable, and when challenges are minimal, it's relatively easy to believe we possess qualities like discipline, patience, resilience, and emotional control. But those traits are not truly tested until we encounter resistance. Pressure acts as a kind of filter. It strips away assumptions and exposes reality. The person you become when things are difficult is often a much more accurate reflection of your character than the person you are when everything is going well. From a biological perspective, the human nervous system is designed to respond to challenge. Throughout evolution, survival depended on the ability to adapt to uncertainty, discomfort, and changing conditions. The brain developed mechanisms that allow us to adjust our behavior when circumstances become demanding. What is interesting is that these mechanisms don't activate at their highest level during comfort. They activate when there is a meaningful challenge that requires attention, effort, and adaptation. In other words, the very conditions people often try to avoid are the same conditions that stimulate growth. Think about moments in your own life when you faced a significant obstacle. Perhaps it was a professional setback, a financial struggle, a major disappointment, or a period of uncertainty. During those moments, certain patterns likely emerged. You may have discovered weaknesses you didn't know existed. You may have realized that some habits were serving you while others were limiting you. You may have found that your confidence was stronger or weaker than you previously believed. Difficult experiences have a way of forcing honest self-assessment. They eliminate the luxury of self-deception. One reason this happens is that challenge creates consequences. When circumstances are easy, small mistakes often go unnoticed. Procrastination might not create immediate problems. Lack of preparation might not be exposed. Emotional impulsiveness might not appear costly. But under pressure, every habit becomes visible. Every weakness becomes easier to identify. Every strength becomes easier to appreciate. Hardship functions almost like a spotlight, illuminating behaviors and thought patterns that remain hidden during easier periods. This is why many individuals report that some of the hardest periods of their lives were also the periods that taught them the most. Not because suffering itself is valuable, but because struggle forces awareness. Awareness is the first step toward change. If you never encounter conditions that challenge your current capabilities, you may never discover where improvement is needed. Growth requires feedback, and adversity often provides the clearest feedback imaginable. Another important aspect of challenge is that it reveals the difference between intention and action. Many people intend to be disciplined. Many people intend to stay calm under pressure. Many people intend to remain committed when circumstances become difficult. But intention alone doesn't define character. Character is revealed through behavior. It's revealed through what you actually do when you are tired, frustrated, uncertain, or afraid. When resources are limited and outcomes are unclear, your actions provide valuable information about who you are and who you are becoming. There is also a tendency to assume that confidence comes before action. In reality, confidence is often the result of action taken under difficult circumstances. When you successfully navigate a challenge, your brain updates its expectations about your capabilities. You develop evidence that you can handle discomfort. You develop evidence that you can adapt. This evidence becomes the foundation for genuine confidence. Not confidence based on optimism, but confidence based on experience. What's fascinating is that even failure can contribute to this process. People often view failure as proof of inadequacy, but biologically and psychologically, failure can serve as information. It identifies gaps in knowledge, skill, preparation, or strategy. When approached correctly, failure becomes a source of data rather than a source of identity. The individuals who grow the most are often the ones who learn to separate outcomes from self-worth. They recognize that setbacks provide information that can be used to improve future performance. Pressure also reveals priorities. During challenging periods, people become more aware of what truly matters. Distractions lose some of their appeal. Superficial concerns become less important. Attention naturally shifts toward essentials. Relationships, health, purpose, discipline, and meaningful goals often move to the forefront. In many cases, adversity simplifies life by clarifying what deserves energy and what does not. Perhaps the most powerful lesson is that difficult experiences often reveal capabilities that were present all along but had never been tested. Many individuals underestimate their ability to endure discomfort, solve problems, and adapt to changing circumstances. They assume they are limited by current conditions. Then a challenge arrives, and they discover a level of resilience they never knew existed. The capacity was always there. The adversity simply provided an opportunity for it to emerge. When viewed through this lens, hard times become more than obstacles. They become mirrors. They reflect back strengths, weaknesses, habits, beliefs, and patterns that might otherwise remain hidden. They provide information that comfort cannot provide. They reveal where growth is needed and where progress has already occurred. And in doing so, they offer one of the most honest assessments of who you are and who you have the potential to become. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human performance is the role that stress plays in shaping the brain and nervous system. Most people think of stress as something purely negative, something that should be avoided whenever possible. But the reality is more nuanced. The human brain evolved in environments that required adaptation. It evolved not in the absence of challenges, but because of them. When you understand how the nervous system responds to adversity, you begin to see that difficult experiences can serve as powerful drivers of growth, provided they are managed correctly. At the center of this process is a concept known as neuroplasticity, which refers to the brain's ability to change its structure and function based on experience. The brain is not a static organ. It is constantly updating itself in response to what you repeatedly think, feel, and do. Every challenge you encounter creates an opportunity for adaptation. When you face something difficult and persist through it, the brain begins to reorganize itself to handle similar situations more effectively in the future. This is one reason why experiences that initially feel overwhelming often become manageable over time. The first time you face a major obstacle, uncertainty dominates your attention. Your heart rate increases, stress hormones rise, your thoughts become consumed by potential risks and outcomes. Yet if you continue engaging with the challenge rather than avoiding it, something remarkable begins to happen. The nervous system starts to learn. It gathers information. It updates predictions. Gradually, the same situation that once triggered intense stress produces a smaller response. This adaptation is not merely psychological, it is biological. Neural circuits become more efficient. The brain learns which signals deserve attention and which can be ignored. Areas involved in emotional regulation strengthen their ability to influence regions associated with fear and threat detection. Over time, the individual develops greater resilience not because the world becomes easier, but because the nervous system becomes more capable of handling complexity and uncertainty. One of the reasons people struggle with adversity is that they often interpret discomfort as a sign that something is wrong. In many cases, discomfort is actually evidence that adaptation is occurring. Consider physical exercise. When muscles are challenged beyond their current capacity, microscopic damage occurs. During recovery, the body repairs and strengthens those tissues. Without sufficient challenge, there is little reason for growth to occur. The nervous system operates according to a similar principle. Moderate levels of stress can stimulate adaptation when followed by appropriate recovery. This does not mean that all stress is beneficial. Chronic, overwhelming stress without opportunities for recovery can have negative effects on health and performance. The key distinction is whether the challenge is perceived as manageable and whether the individual remains engaged with it. Stress becomes productive when it encourages action, learning, and adaptation. It becomes destructive when it leads to helplessness, avoidance, or prolonged exhaustion. An important factor in resilience is exposure. People often assume confidence develops before difficult action, but confidence is usually the result of repeated exposure to challenge. Each time you voluntarily confront something uncomfortable, your brain collects evidence that you can survive and adapt. This evidence changes future responses. What once seemed threatening becomes familiar. What once appeared impossible becomes achievable. Think about any skill you've developed over time. Public speaking, leadership, athletics, entrepreneurship, or even difficult conversations. The first exposure often generates significant stress. There is uncertainty. There is fear of failure. There is concern about outcomes. Yet with repetition, the nervous system adjusts. The stress response becomes more regulated. Performance improves, competence increases. Eventually, activities that once felt intimidating become routine. The same principle applies to adversity. Every difficult experience presents an opportunity to strengthen the systems responsible for focus, emotional regulation, decision-making, and perseverance. When challenges are approached with deliberate effort rather than avoidance, the brain develops a greater capacity to function effectively under pressure. Another important aspect involves attention. During stressful situations, attention naturally narrows. The brain prioritizes information relevant to survival and goal achievement. This can be beneficial when directed properly. Individuals who learn to focus on controllable actions rather than uncontrollable outcomes tend to adapt more effectively. By concentrating attention on behaviors rather than fears, they create conditions that support learning and resilience. Recovery is equally important. Adaptation does not occur during effort alone, it occurs during the period that follows effort. Sleep, proper nutrition, physical activity, social connection, and moments of reflection all contribute to the brain's ability to consolidate learning and strengthen neural pathways. Without recovery, stress accumulates faster than adaptation can occur. With recovery, the nervous system becomes stronger and more efficient. What's particularly fascinating is that resilience itself can become self-reinforcing. Each successful encounter with adversity increases confidence in future encounters. The brain begins to develop an expectation that challenges can be handled. This expectation changes behavior. Individuals become more willing to take calculated risks, pursue ambitious goals, and persist through setbacks because previous experiences have demonstrated their capacity to adapt. Over time, this process transforms the relationship people have with difficulty. Challenges are no longer viewed solely as threats. They become opportunities to strengthen systems that govern performance and well-being. The individual learns that stress, when managed correctly, is not merely something to endure. It is information. It is training. It is a signal that the brain and body are being called upon to grow beyond their current limits. And with repeated exposure, deliberate effort, and proper recovery, the nervous system becomes increasingly capable of meeting those demands with clarity, control, and resilience. One of the most important distinctions we can make when discussing adversity is the difference between experiencing hardship and deriving meaning from hardship. People often assume that suffering automatically produces strength, wisdom, or resilience. But when we look closely at human behavior, we find that this is not always the case. Two individuals can experience remarkably similar challenges and emerge with completely different outcomes. One becomes stronger, more focused, and more resilient. The other becomes discouraged, resentful, and trapped by the experience. The challenge itself is not what determines the outcome. What determines the outcome is the meaning that individual assigns to the challenge. The human brain is constantly trying to make sense of events. It does not simply record experiences like a camera. Instead, it interprets them. It creates narratives. It asks questions. Why did this happen? What does it mean? What should I do next? These interpretations influence emotional states, motivation, behavior, and ultimately long-term adaptation. In many ways, the story you tell yourself about adversity can be more important than the adversity itself. When people encounter setbacks, there is often a natural tendency to focus on loss. Attention gravitates toward what has been taken away, what has gone wrong, or what could have been different. This response is understandable because the brain evolved to prioritize threats and potential dangers. From a survival perspective, paying attention to problems was often more important than appreciating opportunities. However, this same mechanism can become limiting when it prevents learning and adaptation. One of the most powerful cognitive shifts a person can make is moving from the question, "Why is this happening to me?" to the question, "What can this teach me?" The first question tends to encourage passivity. It places attention on circumstances that may be outside of one's control. The second question directs attention toward growth, action, and possibility. It encourages the brain to search for lessons, patterns, and opportunities for improvement. This does not mean pretending that difficult experiences are enjoyable. It does not mean denying pain or minimizing loss. Genuine growth requires acknowledging reality as it is. The challenge is not to eliminate negative emotions, but to prevent those emotions from becoming the final interpretation of an event. Disappointment, frustration, sadness, and uncertainty are natural responses to adversity. The key is recognizing that these emotional states provide information, but they do not have to dictate the future. Meaning plays a critical role because it influences motivation. Human beings can endure extraordinary levels of difficulty when they believe there is a purpose behind their efforts. When challenges are connected to something larger than immediate discomfort, persistence becomes easier. The nervous system becomes more willing to tolerate uncertainty and effort because those experiences are linked to a valued outcome. Think about physical training. Intense exercise creates fatigue, discomfort, and sometimes pain. Yet most people willingly engage in it because they understand its purpose. The discomfort is not interpreted as meaningless suffering. It is viewed as part of a process leading towards strength, health, or improved performance. The exact same physical sensations can feel completely different depending on the meaning attached to them. The same principle applies to life's challenges. A setback can be interpreted as evidence of failure or as feedback that guides future improvement. Rejection can be viewed as proof of inadequacy or as information about where growth is needed. Uncertainty can be seen as a threat or as an opportunity to develop adaptability. The circumstances may remain unchanged, but the interpretation changes everything. Another important aspect of meaning is identity. Difficult experiences often challenge the way people see themselves. When goals are not achieved or expectations are not met, there can be a temptation to define oneself by those outcomes. Yet outcomes are temporary. Identity is shaped by repeated actions and choices over time. Individuals who navigate adversity effectively tend to separate what happened from who they are. They recognize that a setback is an event, not a permanent label. This distinction creates psychological flexibility. Rather than becoming trapped by a single experience, the individual remains capable of learning, adjusting, and moving forward. The brain is remarkably adaptable when it is allowed to focus on solutions instead of conclusions. Growth occurs when adversity becomes part of a larger narrative rather than the entire story. Meaning also influences emotional recovery. When people can identify lessons, opportunities, or sources of purpose within difficult experiences, stress responses often become easier to regulate. The nervous system responds differently when challenges are viewed as manageable and meaningful compared to when they are perceived as random and hopeless. This shift does not eliminate discomfort, but it changes the way the brain processes that discomfort. Over time, individuals who consistently search for meaning within adversity begin to develop a unique form of resilience. They stop expecting life to be free of obstacles. Instead, they learn to view obstacles as part of the process of growth. Challenges become signals to adapt rather than reasons to quit. Setbacks become information rather than evidence of defeat. Difficult periods become opportunities to strengthen qualities that comfort rarely develops. The remarkable thing about this process is that purpose does not remove suffering. It transforms the relationship people have with suffering. The challenge remains real, the effort remains necessary, the uncertainty remains present, but the experience is no longer empty. It becomes connected to growth, learning, and future capability. And when adversity is linked to meaning, it often becomes one of the most powerful forces for personal transformation that human beings can experience. One of the greatest misconceptions about extraordinary individuals is the belief that they were somehow born different from everyone else. People often look at those who demonstrate exceptional discipline, resilience, emotional control, or mental toughness, and assume these qualities are the result of genetics alone. While biology certainly plays a role in shaping temperament and potential, the reality is that most of the characteristics we admire in high performers are developed through repeated exposure to challenge. They are forged through experience. They are built through adaptation. They are earned through a process that unfolds over time. When we observe someone who remains calm during chaos, who continues moving forward despite setbacks, or who maintains focus under pressure, we are often seeing the final result of years of adaptation. What we do not see are the countless moments that contributed to the development of those traits. We do not see the failures, disappointments, uncertainties, and difficult decisions that shape the nervous system and reinforce productive behaviors. We see the outcome, but not the process. The brain learns through repetition. Every experience creates an opportunity for neural circuits to strengthen or weaken. Behaviors that are repeated become more automatic over time. This principle applies to both positive and negative patterns. If an individual repeatedly avoids discomfort, the brain learns avoidance. If an individual repeatedly confronts challenges, the brain learns adaptation. Over weeks, months, and years, these repeated actions begin to shape identity. This is one reason why adversity can become such a powerful teacher. Difficult experiences force individuals into situations that require growth. They create circumstances where existing capabilities may no longer be sufficient. In those moments, adaptation becomes necessary. The nervous system must learn new strategies. New behaviors must emerge. New levels of emotional regulation must develop. Without challenge, many of these adaptations would never occur. Consider the process of building physical strength. No one enters a gym for the first time capable of lifting the heaviest weights. Strength develops gradually through progressive overload. The muscles encounter resistance, recover, and become stronger. Then greater resistance is introduced, and the cycle repeats. Mental toughness follows a remarkably similar pattern. Small challenges prepare individuals for larger challenges. Each successful adaptation expands capacity. Over time, tasks that once seemed impossible become manageable. An important aspect of this process is understanding that resilience is not the absence of difficulty. Resilience is the ability to function effectively despite difficulty. People sometimes imagine that mentally strong individuals no longer experience fear, doubt, or uncertainty. In reality, they experience many of the same emotions as everyone else. The difference lies in how they respond. They have developed systems, habits, and perspectives that allow them to continue acting even when those emotions are present. This ability is often built through repeated exposure to situations that require courage. Courage is not something that suddenly appears during critical moments. It is developed through practice. Every time an individual chooses action over avoidance, they strengthen neural pathways associated with confidence and adaptability. The brain begins to collect evidence that challenges can be managed. This evidence becomes the foundation for future resilience. Another factor that contributes to the development of extraordinary capability is recovery. Growth does not occur solely during periods of effort. Adaptation requires recovery. During sleep, the brain consolidates learning. Neural connections are strengthened. Information is integrated. Physical and psychological systems prepare for future demands. This is why sustainable growth depends on balancing challenge with recovery. Constant pressure without recovery leads to exhaustion. Challenge followed by recovery leads to adaptation. What is particularly fascinating is that many of the qualities associated with exceptional performance emerge gradually and often unnoticed. Individuals rarely wake up one day feeling transformed. Instead, change occurs through small actions repeated consistently over long periods of time. A difficult conversation handled effectively, a setback endured without quitting, a goal pursued despite uncertainty. Each experience contributes a small amount to the overall process. Eventually, these incremental adaptations accumulate into significant change. The environment also plays a critical role. Human beings tend to adapt to the expectations and demands placed upon them. When individuals surround themselves with people who value growth, accountability, and effort, those qualities become easier to develop. Conversely, environments that encourage comfort and avoidance can limit adaptation. The nervous system is highly responsive to social influences. Expectations, standards, and cultural norms all contribute to the behaviors that become reinforced over time. Perhaps the most important lesson is that potential is often far greater than people realize. Many individuals underestimate their ability to adapt because they judge themselves based on current circumstances rather than future capability. They assume their present limitations define their future possibilities. Yet history is filled with examples of people who developed remarkable strength after facing significant adversity. The common factor is not that they were born extraordinary. The common factor is that they responded to challenges in ways that encouraged growth. Every difficult experience presents a choice. It offers an opportunity to retreat into familiarity or move toward adaptation. The path of adaptation is rarely comfortable. It requires effort, uncertainty, and persistence. But it is through this process that resilience is built. It is through this process that discipline becomes stronger. It is through this process that emotional control improves. Over time, the individual becomes increasingly capable of handling demands that once seemed overwhelming. The qualities people admire most are rarely inherited in their final form. They are developed through repetition, challenge, learning, recovery, and persistence. The strongest individuals are not necessarily those who avoided hardship. More often, they are the ones who encountered hardship, adapted to it, and allowed it to shape them into something far more capable than they were before. Their strength was not gifted to them. It was forged through experience, one challenge at a time. The next time life becomes difficult, remember this: pressure is not always a sign that you're breaking. Sometimes it's a sign that you're being shaped into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than you've ever been before. The struggle you're experiencing today may be preparing you for responsibilities, opportunities, and challenges that your current self is not yet ready to handle. Stay disciplined, stay focused, keep moving forward, even when progress feels slow. Because growth rarely happens in comfort, it happens in resistance. And often the strongest version of yourself is waiting on the other side of the hardest season of your life. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Until next time, take care.